Okay, hello everybody. This is Saray from The Purposeful Professional, and we are the podcast for the people, your career, and the culture. Today, I have a really, really special guest. I know her from college. She is amazing. Like, I'm talking business, social impact, languages. This guest does it all, and I want to really get into her story. I'm very excited to talk about her story, but also what is it like to be like a successful 20-something? I think a lot of y'all be asking that. A lot of the listeners want to know, what is it like? So yeah, we have somebody who could talk to us about the ups, the downs, all the things that go into being successful at a young age and figuring it out at the same time. So welcome everybody to Becca. Becca, introduce yourself to the people on the podcast. Welcome.
Hi everybody. Happy to be here. I'm Becca. My hometown is Arlington, Virginia by Washington, D.C. And it's in a class at Wharton called Organizational Behavior with Adam Grant, and graduated from the Huntsman program there in 2021. I then went to Dallas and worked for a small consulting firm called Cicero. I worked in like their social impact consulting. I spent the past year in Mexico through a Fulbright fellowship working there, and I worked for a startup network called Endeavor, which was super exciting. And then right now I'm going back to work for Cicero again, this time in DC. So super excited to share more of some of that journey, some of the kind of options and considerations along the way, and maybe some non-career considerations too. But yeah, happy to be chatting with you all.
Yeah, super happy. Okay, so let's get into it. We like to start with a pop culture discussion, and we like to choose a pop culture topic relevant to each guest's life and experience. And one thing I kept on thinking during our pre-call, which is great, by the way, was about the quarter life crisis. And unfortunately, I think we know too many people who are suffering from it. I feel like to a certain degree, I also suffer from it in a certain way. And I think many of us who were groomed to go to the Penns of the world and, the Harvards of the world, these schools do suffer from it due to the pressure that we put on ourselves. So for today's pop culture discussion, we're referencing two articles, one by Forbes and one by Bradley University, that talk a little bit about the quarter life crisis. So my first question for you is, like, what is your personal definition of a quarter life crisis?
Yeah. So super interesting articles. I liked the definition in one of the articles, which is when you're having kind of this crisis, these thoughts, maybe conflicting thoughts about the direction and quality of your life. I think that's pretty spot on. I think like the direction piece, you're really wondering like, where am I going? Like you mentioned, like when you're in high school, it feels so clear to a lot of us, especially on this like college, like prestigious college path. It feels so clear, and then all of a sudden it's not, and you're like, what do I do about this? And I think the quality of your life too, you're solving for like, is my job too demanding? Am I seeing my friends and family enough? Are my relationships good? Am I healthy? Do I have hobbies? And you kind of can't like solve all these quality pieces at once. So I think it's pretty spot on. I think my reframe that I would love to get your thoughts on is to not necessarily think of it as like a crisis, to not frame it the way you did just now of like you're suffering from it. I think for me, having these questions and these reflections, like it doesn't have to be a bad thing, because you can come out on the other side feeling a lot more clarity, a lot happier. And really, when you're asking these kind of questions and having these thoughts, it's because you care and you really want to have a life you've dreamed of, to be happy, to be helping people, whatever your kind of mission is. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing to be facing these big things and trying to come out on the other side.
Yeah, I feel like I'm one of those people, whenever I see those TikTok posts that say we're the new adults, I'm like, oh my God, yeah. Because I just think when you said like, first of all, like direction and quality of your life, like I think about that heavily because I think high school was so simple and it was so easy. Like I can just, I know the game, and for a lot of us, get the leadership roles, do well on this test, pass these AP classes. Like high school was like linear. College became more muddy because now it's like you could do so many things after college. So college isn't as clear. But even then, I think, like you said, we go in with so many questions and we still do grapple with those questions during our 20s. And I think it's
Yeah.
this thing of, if I was to say my definition of the quarter life crisis, I agree. It's not necessarily something that we suffer from, but it's a phase that we go through. I would say
Mhm.
it's really just this feeling like we have to have it all figured out in our 20s. Like,
Yeah.
the reason you have to have a great relationship, great friendships with your friends. You have to be, cultured and travel and go to all of the events,
Mhm.
and have a great job, and you have to be able to have enough money to do that. And I think the reality of that is I could talk about it because I know, and the podcast listeners know some of my struggles that I've went through. Like what quality does my life have right
Mhm.
now? Wrapping this thing, like what quality? And I've had to ask myself that because I felt like I didn't have it all together. I felt like I was lacking in some way, shape, or form. And I think
Yeah.
the life crisis can make you feel like even if you are on the path to doing something, if I don't succeed by this age, am I really living up to what other people saw me becoming? Am I living up
Mhm.
alma mater's expectations? Am I living up to what I see other people out there doing and living? Yeah. So
Yeah.
my definition, like it's just this thing of like I have to have it all figured out, and if I don't by 25 or 30, I
Mhm.
that, and I think that's what I would call the quarter life crisis, like this harsh judgment that we apply to ourselves based on timelines. You know?
Yeah. No, and those timelines and those comparisons can be so unfair, and all of these different aspects of our life add so much pressure. I think that the other word that really like sticks with me about the quarter life crisis or being in your 20s is
Mhm.
uncertainty. Um,
Yeah.
just dealing with a ton of uncertainty in your life. And then I think the quarter life crisis is uncertainty about what you want out of life and what you want your life to look like, and then how to get there, and like what are the steps, what are the changes I should make in my life. So I read in your pre-questions, you mentioned the book The Defining Decade by Meg Jay. Really great book. She had another book come out too this year called The 20 Something Treatment, which talks about like some of the newer research around being a 20 something. She talks about like COVID and remote work and kind of what that's done to us as well. But her kind of closing message is about making uncertainty your friend, and like learning how to hug and embrace uncertainty and feel more comfortable in it. And ultimately, that kind of leaves you with this message more of like hope towards the future, as opposed to if you're just feeling overwhelmed by uncertainty and beaten down by it every single day. So,
Yeah. I think uncertainty is another thing that I agree. Like it's something that defines it so much because I feel like your 20s is, I always say like we're like snakes shedding skin. You go through so many
mhm,
different evolutions and changes, even if they're not big, like many evolutions, like moving to a new city or, even getting a new group of friends, or you go through so
yeah,
many changes that I think you come into your 20s, like to think like we start our 20s still in college and we will end our 20s completely different people is
completely
crazy,
different.
but it's like it's so much growth that happens. So that leads me to my second question. Like, have you ever
Okay.
experienced any symptom or, effect of this quarter life crisis or quarter life transition, we can call it? And if so, like, what are some of the factors that led you to feel that way?
Yeah. I know we talked about this some in the pre-call too, but I think for me, this year has been quite the canon event in my life, if you will. Um, so like I mentioned, I've been in Mexico for the past year through this awesome Fulbright, and the seeds for that Fulbright were planted. I mean, really, they were planted when I was a little girl, and my parents put me in Spanish immersion school, and I started studying Spanish. But really, they were planted like early on in college when I had some opportunities to travel to Mexico and to Argentina and be there, like studying and working. And I was like, this is so cool. This is so different than like a trip, and so I want to do this again. I want to be somewhere for a longer period of time. And so I wanted to do this Fulbright coming out of college. It didn't work out. And that was like COVID time too. So I felt like that wouldn't have been the best time. And so then when I finally got it 2 years out of college, it was like, wow, like pieces are coming together. Uncertainty is diminishing for the next year. Like this is adding some rails to my like journey here. Um, and it was always temporary, it always had like this cool expiration date. And so in the beginning of that, in the middle of that, it was like, this is amazing. I don't have to like decide what comes next yet either. And
Mm,
then I think the like ending months of it were harder because it was like, okay, we do have to decide, like, I really love living here, but what exactly do I like love about it? And what did I love about like my life at Cicero in Dallas before? And
yeah,
what do I want my life to look like moving on from this? And also, do I want to go to grad school? Where else do I want to live, etc. Um, and so I was like doing a ton of coffee chats with people about kind of their paths and exploring a lot of different things. And also, yeah, like looking at different opportunities.
uh-huh,
But ended up deciding to like go back to Cicero and continue like learning there and just feel like that is the path that I'm on. But it was a lot of like different feelings like during that time. And so I think for me, that is the most like career uncertainty, especially that I've felt. Because I think consulting and the Fulbright were like so clear to me before.
yeah. I listen, like as time goes on, we do feel more uncertain, which is crazy. But then there are those moments of clarity, like you experienced with Cicero. And I'm glad you experienced that and navigated through that because I think so many people are wondering, is their job the right job? Or am I in the right
Mhm.
position? And I think all of that, all of those feelings can be very terrible. I would like to say
Yeah,
I had a quarter life crisis on my own self when I quit my first job.
yeah,
Um, it was one of those things where, like, I just got an idea and I ran after the idea, not understanding what it would involve or what it would take, and I'm over a year into the path that I'm on, but trust me when I say, like, for those who are in, like, traditional employment, there are times when, like, those of us who are pursuing entrepreneurship sit back and we're like, "Damn, like, should I have just, made
yeah.
simpler because it definitely threw me for a wrench. It made me feel a type of way, and then on top of it, I had gotten into graduate school before I quit.
Mhm.
So it was a lot of like, okay, I know I'm going back to
Yeah,
school. What do I do with these 4 years of a deferral? Am I wasting it trying to build something that might not work? Am I putting my too much of stock into my passions and like I'm not making enough money? Like there were all these questions I was asking myself. And I would say, like, for you, I can relate to like what you're going through with like the lack of clarity causing that because
mhm,
I'm swimming in the lack of clarity right now. Like, I don't know, I wish I could say I know my business is gonna succeed. I have no idea. Like, we're launching new
mhm.
trying things, but I don't know what it's gonna look like 5 years out, 10 years out. And I think that for me, it was this question of like stability versus risk that
Yeah,
caused me through this flurry. And even if it's not entrepreneurship, we go through that. Like, should I take that new job? Should I move to that new place? Or should I stay?
mhm.
No. Should I develop on my current path or should I completely pivot industries? I think because I graduated in 2022, a lot of my peers are like finally leaving consulting or banking or like trying to find like they
Yeah,
hit their mark and like they're
the
trying to
2-year mark. Mhm.
and I see what that looks like and I'm like, damn, like peace be with you because it
Yeah,
gets outside of what we know, and I
it
think
really
that
does, yeah.
inflicts that crisis onto us because it can be tough. It can be tough to brave the unknown, but when
Mhm,
we do, um, whether and every choice we make is an important choice. So I always tell
mhm.
the choice that's best for you. But like you said, in that process of discovering what's best, there's so much uncertainty and there's so much
Yeah,
like, no, you know?
yeah. No, every choice is an important choice, and you also, as you move along, you start kind of closing doors. Like, it makes it harder to break into XYZ the farther you go on, path B. And so you
Yeah.
kind of have to keep that in mind too, but you also can't get hung up on the should I have done this instead? Oh, my peer did that. And always like second guessing or like having regrets. You still have to like go forward. And you can also take some comfort too in that some decisions can be reversed and you can pivot. And, like I just saw somebody the other day who graduated from my same program who's going to medical school. And I was like, wow, that's so cool that he's like kind of
Yeah.
doing that pivot and going that way now. Like it's never too late for a lot of things as well.
Yeah. That's such a pen pivot though. Like medical school, that is a pen
I
pivot.
know. The
Like
warning to medical school pivot.
that is a pen pivot, honestly. But I think like that leads me to my next question. Like, does society and social media create like unrealistic expectations about what your 20s should look like? Like maybe it's not us. Maybe we're just shown like the one person that like was a millionaire by 26 or was a billionaire by 30. And we feel like we have to be that person. Like, I always think of that. Like, maybe it's not me. Maybe it's social media.
Mhm.
Like, what do you think? Like, is society the one doing it to us, or is it all in our head? Because sometimes I wonder, like, what are the external factors that
Yeah.
contribute to this?
Yeah. I mean, there definitely are external factors. I actually think media, like TV shows and movies, 20 somethings are often like way less together than most, quote unquote, together than most of
Mm,
the 20 somethings I know. Like, if you've seen the memes about like Carrie Bradshaw and like how in the world was she like buying all these shoes in Sex and the City and living in Manhattan, how did she exist and go to lunch every day? Um, but then I think social media too can be really hard for the comparison games. And by social media, I mean Instagram and LinkedIn are my most used platforms. And it's
mm,
like you open up Instagram, someone's engaged. You open up LinkedIn, someone's promoted to XYZ or going to the grad school.
yeah,
Um, but I think you can break that down to you can be so happy for those people, even if they're like people you don't even know that well. And then you can also break down like a barrier of like everything's perfect on the outside, like a facade, by just having like real conversation with people and connecting with them and hearing about like some of their struggles too.
yeah. No, I
I also
agree.
think that people, I think this is kind of back to the like uncertainty point is like you have to be comfortable in the discomfort too and
Mm,
in the muddiness of it. Um, one of the really like a compliment that stuck with me for my time or my first project at Cicero, or maybe it was like a year in, was we created this like pre-read for a client workshop we were doing. And so it ended up being like a page or two. And one of the senior partners told me like this pre-read is like one is a really great, like one of the best ones that I've seen. And what he really liked about it, because we'd been working on it for a long time, was he was like, I know how much work went into these like 1, 2 pages, like how many iterations we had, how many discussions we had. And then
mm,
this came out on the other side and it just shows like it's super clear, but breaks down the nuance. Like it shows on the other side of that messiness. And so I think that I sometimes like think back to that conversation when I'm in a really muddy analysis or conversation or like life situation. And I'm like, this is very like difficult to trudge through right now. But I know on
yeah,
the other side will be like something way better than what I could imagine, or if I didn't go through this muddiness. So it really
yeah.
is like the only way out is through the muddiness. And so I think that you can kind of embrace that as well, even when you're very deep in somebody's Instagram.
It's crazy. Like, honestly, the times where I had to just delete the apps, like, I was like, team delete. I can't deal with it
Yeah.
anymore. You're right. Like, and it's also getting to the point where friends are getting married, and that's a whole nother conversation.
Mhm.
Like, oh shoot, like, should I be on this path? But you're right.
Mhm.
Like, you end up closed, and you actually talk to them. You realize, like, hey, like they're going through the same things I'm going through. It's
Yeah.
just they might have
They're
more money.
questioning what they're doing, even though they're saying it's the best thing to ever happen to them. So,
Like, they might have more money or, it might look more glamorous, but they're also going through the same thing. And I think
yeah.
that, you're right, like, growing up in the early 2000s, I never thought that, like, being in my 20s would be, "Oh, I have to be a millionaire or Forbes 30 under 30." I didn't know about those things till I came to Penn. I thought you're
True.
crashing out on someone's couch
Yeah.
or it was a bit different because growing up, I wanted to be in entertainment. So, I would always see like, oh, the actress is like crashing out on somebody's couch, like aspiring actress crashing out on somebody's couch,
Yeah.
working as a
It's
bartender,
very different
barely
than when
making.
you like yeah.
And I think when I went to Penn, it showed me like people who are really successful at a young age, and I was like, oh damn, so people are actually doing it like
Mhm.
this age. I had no idea because my social circles before that, and even the people that I know, 20s is like I'm still crashing on people's couches. I'm still
Yeah.
figuring it. And I think when you come from certain circles, it's more of a pressure to like have your own place or have your own car or like
Mhm.
things when it's like, man, like growing up, nobody I knew in their 20s had those things. Like your 20s was kind of
Mhm.
like you're fresh out of school, you're still kind of broke, you're figuring it out. You might go back to school again. Um, you're too broke to live by yourself. So if you do
Yeah.
have roommates, like I didn't see the like life of the rich and famous that I think
Yeah.
certain other people exposed me to. And I was like, oh shoot, so this is how y'all get down at 21, 22, 23. Okay. So I think like you said, like it's not necessarily traditional like TV media, because TV always shows us like the whimsical 20 something for
You're
comedic effect,
right. Yeah.
but it's like the social media and the social comparison. And then depending on how like powerful or connected your network is, you're going to see a completely different side of the 20s versus like,
Uh-huh.
no, I feel like I see a different side. And, my interns and my volunteers, many of them are in their 20s and they're like, well,
Mhm.
like, I'm in my 20s, like, I'm still living at home and I'm like, wow, like, it grounds
Mhm.
me. What I've seen or what I've been conditioned to think as normal is actually the outlier. And I never
Mhm.
thought it that way, but I think when I started doing my work and many of my interns are my age and in the same, like, crashing out or that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
Like, just riding it. I'm like, dang, like I was taught to expect so much out of myself at such a young age. Why was I taught that? You know?
Yeah. I think the concept of like what your peer set is really important,
Mm,
and being really mindful of like who your peer set is, or peer sets, and how
yeah.
that like evolves over time. Like when you get to Penn, that's obviously like a very different peer set than like for most people, like where they went to high school. And then the same thing, like depending on what job you do or what path you take. And it just like continues to evolve. Like one of my good friends in my Fulbright program, when we were talking about like going to grad school, and she's like, yeah, it seems like a lot of people who have done Fulbrights, like they really want to go to like Harvard Business School, Stanford, business school. They go
Mhm.
to Stanford. And she's like, "I don't know, like, I guess so, like, I guess that's kind of, like, more of a consideration for me now." And then, someone told her, "Yeah, but doing a Fulbright isn't enough to go to Harvard." And she was like, "Oh, man," like, I maybe thought it was. So it's like the peer set changes again once you do something like that, and you just have to be, like, mindful of that and understand how it can open doors for you, and that's amazing, but also not, count on that and risk, like, getting let down, um, in any way.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. So we're going to end this with this one major question. If anyone is listening to this and facing like what they think is a quarter life crisis or quarter life transition transformation, like what advice would you give them? Like what would you tell them? How would you help them navigate through that?
I think my advice would be the only way out is through. So
Oof.
similar to, like, what I was saying earlier about getting through the muddiness,
Mhm.
sometimes there's no, like, quick Band-Aid option. There's no, like, checklist necessarily. I think one of the articles that you sent did have, like, "Here's some steps," but
Yeah.
the only way really is to, like, reflect, put your head down, talk to people, reach out, ask for help, and just keep putting, like, one foot in front of the other and making the changes that you wanna see.
Yeah. It it ain't easy. It definitely is
It's
not.
not easy.
Thank you, Becca. That was like a life coaching session for my 20 things. Okay. And hopefully that introduced you all to Becca and her amazing thoughts. Okay. So we're going to get into your story. We like to divide this episode in three parts: people, career, culture. So I'm going to start with who you are as a person. And one thing that stood out to me during the pre call was that you unapologetically said that you've always been an achiever. And you also pointed out, and I agree with this, like some people don't want to say they're an achiever because there's like a stigma. For some reason, there's some weird stigma attached to that still. I don't know why. So take me back in time. Like, when did you notice this drive within you for leadership, for social impact, or even for business? Like, when did you first notice this like achievement orientation?
Yeah. No, so interesting, like, how you teed that up. It's like, why is it a little bit cringe for you to reflect back to me that I said I've always been an achiever? Why am I kinda like, "Oh, like, why do they say that?" Because, it's little like, you take a personality test and they'll be like, "You value achievement," or like, "You're an achiever. You
Mm,
value, results," or whatever. But yeah, I do think that I've always, like, had an orientation toward, goals and achievements, and I think that understanding that about yourself is really important, and then also understanding, your achievements aren't everything, and we can talk about that more later.
Mhm.
But yeah, I definitely can think back to like being a kid, and always, paying attention in class, wanting to get good grades, excel in projects and clubs. And then I think high school was like a really pivotal time for me where I like came into more of my confidence and leadership and also understanding of like who I was in my like community and the world. So
Yeah.
like a really for like very much like formative experience that I had was through the organization Girl Up,
Mhm.
which is like a girls leadership training initiative. When I was involved in high school, it was very much focused on like girls in developing countries and helping them and um, like kind of understanding your role in doing fundraising and advocacy. But for me, it looked like starting a club at my school and organizing, meetings and fundraisers and talking and starting conversations about, access to education and advocacy, but also conversations about like issues that girls faced in the U.S.
Mhm.
And then that club to help me get involved with other clubs in the DC area and nationally, and just opened up a lot of doors to meet other teens who were passionate about issues and social change, and wanted to like make a difference and starting locally, but thinking really globally. And so I think that that was really kind of the first things that really drove me outside of school in high school. And I just felt really like empowered through that. And it was like, wow, like look at what happened because I mentioned this to some friends and then mentioned it to a teacher. And then we had a club. Like we ended
Yeah.
up, raising money and getting to go to Capitol Hill and the White House and other like cool things in DC. And these people are here like because I raised my hand and said I wanted to do this and no
Yeah.
one stopped me basically. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I feel like that's that's amazing thing, and I feel like I wanted to ask about that because I think there's nothing wrong with being an achiever. There's nothing wrong with that, and if anything, like, everybody has dreams and goals or something burning inside of them to achieve something, and if you are an achiever, you already do have that drive, so I always say it's just a matter of funneling that drive into
Mhm.
something that you care deeply about, and when I coach, like, my highly successful people, I always
Yeah.
tell them you already have the drive. You succeeded at everything that your hands have touched, right? From college, high school.
Mhm.
So funnel that into something you care about. And I think it's wonderful that your life, you were able to find something you cared about very, very early because I think,
Mhm.
we know those people. All they care about is the job. All they care about is the grades. All they care about is the grad school acceptance for vanity reasons. They still haven't really found the thing where it's like, okay, I care about this more than school, or I care about this more than
Mhm.
just success it can give me, but the satisfaction that I get. And I think that that's wonderful that you were able to find that and yeah, find that at a young age because I feel like those are the things that when we become older, I feel like truly set us apart. Like we think back to those foundational times where
Mhm.
we first found our true passions and like how that shaped us. But I also do want to know, like, as a woman, so you talked about being in Girl Up, like, how did it feel to be a young woman with such strong leadership instincts and drive? Like, were you supported in developing these aspects of yourself, or do you feel like it took longer for you to like fully embrace your ambitions and ideals?
Yeah, I would say I was really supported. Of course, like my family always really supported me in any like academic and extracurricular professional endeavors. And then having like some of my friends be interested in joining this club too. And then the teacher who like sponsored the club, so like helped us run our activities and stuff. She wasn't my teacher. I just knew that she was like interested in women's rights. And so I just like reached out to her and said, here's my plan. And she said, okay, great. And so I feel like as a woman, I think like my high school was such a safe environment for me, which I'm like super
Mm.
lucky to be able to say. And I already was in other clubs. I'd seen people, what it was like to run a club. I had relationships with my teachers, with the like administration. And so that was like a really like contained environment to do something maybe more like entrepreneurial, like in that context. And then I think by being in Girl Up and meeting all these other girls who are interested in it, in like feminism and women's leadership, it
Uh-huh.
made me like more aware of what it meant to be a young woman and what my life, might look like
Uh,
going out into the world as a young woman. But I think for me, I I've always felt like very supported as a young woman and able
mm,
to like raise my voice. And I think anytime that I maybe haven't like raised my voice or something like that, it's more like my personality of being more like an internal processor and being like, well, I want to present this when I fully know my thoughts and I want to give the best answer for whatever it is. And so I think it's more like a me thing than a woman thing.
yeah. Oh my God. I listen, like I feel like I was just saying, like, I love that for you. Like, I love that for Becca because I feel like so much as women grew up being told we were bossy. I'm sure you know about Sheryl
Oh
Sandberg and that.
yeah, that for sure.
And we grew up being told
But
like,
maybe I
oh
just didn't care if people told me I was bossy. And may
no, like,
and because it was like the girl boss era, like 2016 was like peak quote unquote girl boss era, and the like being bossy is a compliment thing. So I don't know. I'm not really bothered by that, and I think people have kind of now they've waned on calling someone bossy because of that. So
I agree. I totally agree. And you know what's funny? Like I said like just like a funny comment. I was like, how do we go from like girl boss to the soft life? Because we were raised like with the like band bossy. And then of
yeah,
course we were in high school in 2016 when Hillary Clinton was running for president and like this the nasty woman
yeah,
t-shirt. Like so it became like a thing to like be a woman
uh-huh,
leader. I wouldn't say like I faced a lot of like not feeling comfortable in my own skin and I had to get rid of that. But I also think I agree with what you're saying. Like the girl boss, it was the age of the girl boss. It was the era of the girl boss. I think
yeah,
pass that into the soft life, which that's a whole other episode. But
yeah,
it was that time where, you know, we were as young women, like I said, Sheryl Sandberg had that commercial, Beyonce was on it. So many people were saying, like, hey, bossy's a bad word. Stop calling her that. She's a leader. So I'm
mhm,
you were able to benefit from like that wave of like, yeah, like you can be young, a woman, and be a leader. And yeah, because
mhm,
you are today. Yeah. Mhm.
yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you told me about like being involved in like women's empowerment spaces in high school, such as leading Girl Up. Like what initially
Right.
drove you to that space? And like what do you think that space gave you in terms of perspective, like personal growth and also connections?
Yeah. I can remember the day that I like really learned about Girl Up was I was volunteering at a Girls on the Run 5K with kind of like a
Yeah.
family friend. Which Girls on the Run is like a after school program. I think more for like elementary and middle school aged girls. Which the idea behind that too is also like girls empowerment. Like you train, I forget, like twice a week, and then it culminates in this 5K. And so I'd done Girls on the Run too as a kid, and then we were just volunteering, running with some girls, like, for their 5K, like, their culmination event, and Girl Up, like, had a table at this Girls on the Run DC event, and I think I talked to them, I don't really remember, but I definitely had a flyer that I took from that, and then I remember, like, maybe a few months later, my parents and I were, like, we were at dinner at home, and I was like, "I have to tell you guys something." And I, like,
Mm.
walked back to my room, and I grabbed the flyer and set it down in front of them, and I was like, "I think I'm going to do this." I had been, like, cooking on it already, thinking about, like, they, had some stats about, like, girls' education and, like, their access opportunities in, like, especially in, like, developing countries, and had been, like, cooking on that, thinking about it, and I was like, "I'm going to be involved in this organization." And they were
Mm.
like, "Okay, like, that's really cool for you, like, what does that mean?" Or, like, "How can we help?" Like, mo follow-up questions, but mostly just like, "Okay, cool." Um, so that's kind of maybe that's a interesting me thing is, like, I was cooking on it before it happened.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just remember feeling really, like, interested in this cause and the idea of, like, where you were born having such an impact on what your life looks like in terms of education and health and so many, like, other aspects, especially of, like, your quality of life, and just knowing, like, how many privileges I'd had in my life, and wanting to do something to help, basically. And so, yeah, that was, like, freshman year of high school, and then sophomore year was the year that we, like, officially launched the club, um, and kind of went from there. But yeah, I think it gave me a lot of perspective on like the world is so much bigger than my high school, than Arlington, Virginia. And there's so much that you can do. And this idea too of like having a collective impact. And so knowing that I was joining like other girl up clubs and that together we were going to advocate for this legislation or like raise this money, I think was like super inspiring and exciting. But really it is like that idea of like thinking globally, acting locally, and knowing that the world is a lot bigger than your slice of it.
No, I love that. I really do love that. And when you said you had the paper and the flyer and then you stewed on it for a while, that reminds me of growing up how I used to like have my notebook with my ideas. And I used to like
Yeah.
sit and like I used to like sit and like draw things out and plan things out. And I think that's really cool that you saw this, like your heart just latched onto it. And then, like you said, it gave you that ability to think outside of the realm of what you saw yourself traditionally doing. And I think like those are the best experiences. If I think about the best experiences in my life, like they've been the ones that surprised me, like got me out of my comfort zone,
Mhm.
me to see beyond what I thought was capable. So I think that was amazing. And I love the fact that you were able to move beyond like you said, Arlington, Virginia. I feel like when you're from certain places, it can feel like you're so like your life revolves around that place. I'm from Westchester, New York, from right outside of New York City. And
Mhm.
well, you're so close to Manhattan, but I didn't grow up in Manhattan. I grew up in the suburbs.
Mhm.
So I think sometimes when you're from that lifestyle, it could be so like, school, activities, home, like your life can be very like very commonplace, especially in the suburbs. And to get that experience to like see outside of that and to see a woman and interact with women from other nations, I can only imagine like how
Mhm.
trans for you. So I think that's amazing. I think that's an amazing experience to
Mhm.
have. Yeah. Okay. So beyond Girl Up and that experience, like exposing you to diversity, like you always had a love for languages and travel. And
Mhm.
I surprised in the pre-call where you were like, you did Mandarin. I was like, okay, so you did multiple languages. And that's amazing too, because I think like usually people have that one language that they stick to, but it seems like you always had a love for languages and travel. Like tell me
Mhm.
about your first international experiences or internationally oriented activities and like how it forever like shaped your trajectory moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I was actually just thinking about this too, like in the previous answer of like my really pivotal experiences growing up. And yeah, this common thread of like the world being so much bigger than like my town. And
Mm,
so, yeah, like I mentioned, I went to a Spanish immersion school, which means like starting in kindergarten, we had half the day in English, half the day in Spanish. And so I grew up like not knowing how to say certain science words in English because my science was in Spanish.
ooh, wow.
Not really. They're normally like cognates, but
Yeah.
it was a great way to like learn a language without having to just like study vocabulary and that kind of thing. Like it feels very second nature. And then I in 7th grade you have like an elective spot open up. And so I think that's when a lot of people start taking a language. They're in, like Spanish 1. And then a lot of people who, like me, were already in Spanish did other stuff like art or or music or like another elective. And yeah, I remember thinking, no, I want to do another language. Like, I really like being able to speak Spanish. I'd already had some experiences like traveling to other countries. And I signed up for Mandarin because I was like, what are the most common languages spoken in the world? This is a little bit
Yeah.
of my, so for some Adam Grant vocabulary, he talks about like maximizers and satisficers, and
Mhm.
maximizers like want to do everything and they want to have like the best option as opposed to being just satisfied. And so that's a little bit of my maximizer personality coming out is I was like, I want to be able to speak to the most people in the world. And so if I had English, Spanish, and Mandarin, French was up there too as a consideration. Like
Mm,
then I'll be so set. So I thought it was so fun to have my Spanish classes where we were starting to get into like grammar and more advanced stuff, and then with Mandarin starting at square one, like ni hao means hello. Um,
yeah. Ooh.
but yeah, I think the chances that I had to growing up like feels so lucky to be able to have traveled to other countries and like use those language skills and just see other people, see what people's lives are like around the world. So I had several like family trips to different countries in Latin America because my dad had lived in Nicaragua and Costa Rica in his 20s.
Uh,
So he was always interested in like planning trips where where we could practice Spanish. Me and my brother, who was also in Spanish immersion. And then I also, the summer after ninth grade, went to China for like around a month um,
uh,
to like study more and to teach English. And I thought that that was such an amazing experience too. And I think that the China summer and studying Mandarin is a good example of me just being like, I think I'm just gonna go do this, and then I just go and do it. Well, with support and that kind of thing. But I think I just came to my parents one day in ninth grade similarly and was like, I really want to go to China this summer. Like, you get into high school and you start thinking about like you do more maybe like extracurricular things in the summer as
uh,
opposed to before then. I had just been doing like different camps. I was always on the summer swim team. And so that was like the whole summertime. I think that for that summer, I was like, okay, I've been studying Mandarin for a little bit, and I would really love to like do this program. And they were like, what? Like, what kind of
yeah.
15-year-old like comes to us with this kind of proposal? But they fully supported it and helped me go. And it was just like, it's kind of crazy when I look back on it because it was like 10 years ago now. But I'm like, yeah, I don't remember thinking about it that much. Not in the same way that this year I've been like, should I go back to consulting? Should I stay in Mexico? Blah, blah, blah. Like, I think I
Yeah.
was just like, I really want to go to China. And I found this program online. And so, like, I'm going to do it. The mom and dad say it's okay. And they said it's okay. And so there I was, like, on a flight to Beijing.
I mean, we were carefree. Like, we were carefree. We could musical. So a lot of
Yeah.
school was gonna be fun, and we came ready to have fun. Like, looking back, so many of us we were carefree kids and teens. Like,
We were carefree.
I just want to do this. I just want to do that. Like, High School Musical was our
Hmm.
like what high school should.
Yeah.
So we really came to have fun, and a lot of us did have fun. I'm glad that you were
Hmm.
once again another story of you like having the idea and then telling your parents because it shows that you were self-driven at a young age because I
Hmm.
feel like there's so many people who like we know them like they grew up playing violin because parents told them to and they like
Hmm.
so many of us especially as we get older we realize wow my parents dictated a lot of my life. That wasn't my story but I talked to people who that was their story of like parents made
Hmm.
Mandarin, parents made them take violin, parents made them play sports. And you get to this thing where like it's like, oh, I'm super well rounded, but I'm not passionate about anything because like I didn't really choose
Hmm.
anything. So versus like you were very self-directed. You had the idea, you brought it to your parents, and your parents like they went along with it because parents also
Yeah.
got parts too. And parents they went along with it. So I think that's amazing that it just shows like, wow, like you knew what you wanted, you went after that. But there's also this theme, like I said before in the question, of wanting that international exploration because,
Hmm.
yes, everybody wasn't that curious at 15. Like some of us
Hmm.
were happy with, we were happy with our simple life, our one language. Like I went to a school where language wasn't that popular. Like we would, because
Hmm.
you get to take the regents in the language and then you completely test out of it. So a lot of people just tested out a language. They didn't want to do 3 years language
Yeah.
so I'm fascinated because I'm like, wow, like you really had that innate curiosity to do something international and you had that
Hmm.
international you coming from Arlington, Virginia, which is great. Which is great. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't to describe myself as carefree, but in hindsight, I'm like, I was carefree. Like, I'm sure that my parents handled all of my like visa paperwork for China. And then, like, when I got to Mexico a year ago and had to do all this stuff for that, I was like, oh my God, like, this is a lot of paper. So, carefree with really great, like, support.
Yeah, absolutely. I listen, I feel like compared to who we are now, we were carefree.
Yeah,
Like
exactly. I didn't know
everything
it then.
maximizer brain is like, dang, like you better be the best or you better do it the best way that you can and not mess up. So I think
Yeah.
compared to we're carefree. So my last question for you in this people section, I always want to share something
Okay.
interesting that surprises people. And one of the things that surprised me during the pre-call is when you said you wanted to be an orthodontist. I was like, what? At first I was like, oh, that makes sense. Then I was like, what? Like when I was writing the question, I was like, okay, I need to hear about like why you wanted to be an orthodontist because I think that's gonna throw people in for a loop. Like not many
It's so
10-year-olds
random.
10 years old want to put braces on people and fill cavities.
Sure.
Even though that's a necessary job, that is a tough job. Dentists really go through a lot. So tell me,
Yeah.
what attracted you to orthodontics, and like what was the journey from orthodontics to to what you're doing now?
What we're doing now.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, this is another really random, like, childhood anecdote. I wish my mom was, like, listening in for all this stuff. She'll be, like, really pleased with all these stories. But, yeah, I was one of those really cool kids who got braces in 4th grade. So I actually
Mm,
had braces twice. I had them just on for my 4 front teeth in 4th grade, and then I got the full set in 6th grade. And
mm,
so there I was, like, ahead of the curve, like, braces weren't really they were I felt like I was cool for having braces in 4th grade because no one else did. Maybe no one else thought I was cool, but I was like, "Sorry, guys, I've gotta go to the orthodontist. My mom pulled me out of school."
yeah.
I don't think
Yeah.
that was what was driving the orthodontia ambitions, but I think one day I was just like, maybe after a braces appointment or something, I was like, "I think that I could do this job, mom."
Mm,
It's so cool, like, the doctor comes in and they, like, talk to you and they help you, like, get your teeth straighter, and they're
yeah.
just doing it by, they're just kind of solving a puzzle. They like, your teeth are a certain way, and they have to make decisions and then make it so that your teeth are straight instead, and then you come out with straight teeth. So, this is very much like my maybe me twisting this story to fit my arc now, but it is like the orthodontists like help people something that they can't do for themselves, and they
Mhm.
do it in a way that is kind of like a puzzle and like a problem solving component of it. But I think it's really funny and like maybe more original. And maybe that's something about me too, is I like being more original, like more out there. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think orthodontist changed to like economist, diplomat in high school, like doing all of these like international development things. Like I was very into Model UN too, very into going to the State Department. And then I like came across this Huntsman program at Penn, and I was like, okay, it's like it's a BS in economics, but that really means business. But like I think business would be cool too, and I'm interested in that, and I'm interested in this like international studies, international relations side. And so that's like how I ended up doing that major at Penn. And then I think everything since then too has still followed this thread of like having a social impact or like an international component to it. Um, and has used like some of those people and problem solving skills. And ultimately the goal is, yeah, to help people and make an impact on the world through that work.
Yeah, it's crazy how, you can take, orthodontics and, boil it down to, okay, this is why I was interested. Like,
Mhm.
people, problem
Maybe.
solving. Yeah, the opportunity to work with different people. Honestly, the way that I'm obsessed with those TikToks that show, the before and after the braces,
Yeah.
it's crazy, but it's so interesting. And
Yeah.
honestly, for, going to dentist growing up and, looking at people's teeth, I get it, because it's such a helpful job too. Like, you get to transform how people look, and I
Mhm.
think transform how somebody looks, you can transform their confidence. I mean, we all know those people who,
Yeah, that's true.
went from being crooked to smile like, "Oh, wow." Like,
Yeah.
"Wow, look great." So, I think, having braces, I prayed to God to not have braces because I already had glasses, but for those that had braces, I always thought braces were cute. My brother had braces. They're so cute, and they're an era. Like, you get to go through that, and you have great teeth
There's such
afterward.
an era. There's
Yeah.
such a before, a during, and an after to braces. So maybe that was part of it too, was just, like, the transformation of it, the novelty of it. Like, when I was in my braces era, I had that routine, it was something different. You got to
Yeah.
pick different rubber band colors too, I forgot about this. The
They
same way I pick different, like, nail colors now, probably, I was like I remember being like, "Okay, I'm gonna get green for St. Patrick's Day." Like, maybe it's just that little aspect too of, like, adding some novelty and variety to your life.
No, braces were an era, and then also, the glow up, they're like, "Oh, you
Yeah.
never move," it's
Yeah, that was a
oh,
big deal the day
it's a
you went to school again
whole
with your braces
day.
off.
Like, oh my God. I swear, like early 2000s was like the best time to grow up. That was an era. Like now,
There's an
like
era.
have Invisible or like Smile Direct Club, but they
Yeah,
don't
like, people
go.
are people still doing braces?
No, if you're doing them now, like be prepared to be teased because a lot of folks that
Yeah,
have now for Smile Direct Club, but that was a whole era. Anyway, let's get into your career because I think
okay.
that people are looking for. Okay, so you and I both went to Penn and Wharton within Penn. What was the moment for you when like you first got to Penn and you were like, this is different? Did you have a moment like that? Because some people didn't have a moment like that. Um, did Penn meet or exceed your expectations, and or did it stretch you to fulfill like your potential? I'd love to hear.
Yeah. So when you say this is different, do you mean that this is different from high school? This is different from my expectations? This is different from somewhere else? Or just however I wanna take it?
All of the above. You can take it in any direction. Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like that transition to Penn was like, wow. Like, meeting the other students, and having, yeah, your schedule be so different than high school, the environment be so different. Um, I think, yeah, it really was such a big transition, and then I feel like if you couldn't kind of gather from my, like, how I kind of thought about what I was gonna study in college and how I wanted to be, like, an economist or a diplomat, like, I wasn't necessarily somebody who was, like, 9 years old, "I'm going to go to Wharton School of Business, I'm going to work in finance, XYZ." And then you meet people in their first weeks of Wharton, and they are
Yeah.
like that, and this is what they've dreamed of for a long time. And you're like,
Mm,
"Wow," like, it sounds like you don't wanna say like this was an afterthought, but it was like, I really wanted to do the Huntsman program, International Studies in Business. I really wanted to do international stuff, and I thought that Wharton and business, like, seemed cool. Um, did I cut out? No, it's okay.
no, I hear you. Continue.
Okay. Um, and so I think just the kind of being in that new environment, having people have their 5-year plans, having it feel like pretty intense and heavy, um, was like a lot. But then at the same time, I felt like right off the bat, people were like pushing back against that too and encouraging you, you don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to do XYZ internship. And I'm like, you're like, what internship? Like, I didn't even know that that existed. They're like, this isn't everything. And so I do feel like there are people, like, pushing back against that culture and wanting to, like, bring more kind of perspective, and have people kind of think outside of the box with their careers, which is really nice. And so I feel like Penn, yeah, surprised me and challenged and stretched me in a lot of ways. And I think especially looking back to, like, that peer set component of it, like, the students that you're with in a class, in a group project, um, they can really kind of challenge you to think differently about your career, your perspectives. And I think that, I have so many good friends from Penn who I still like talk to every day, and they still like stretch and help me think about my life in different ways. So I feel like I had overall a really positive experience. But that's not to say that it wasn't like a lot, a lot of the time.
Yeah. I thank you for the relatable take. That's just relatable. Like I think like there's some of it. So there's some people who grow up and it's like, oh, all my life I knew I was destined for this Ivy League school. And then there are other
Mhm.
people, it's like I happen to apply, I happen to get in. I always say
Yeah.
like there's types of students, the people who like
Yeah.
they were destined for this path and their entire life aligned with that. And they tend to pursue the post graduation path that aligns with that. And then the people that like, oh, I just happened to apply. Literally, the first time I heard about Wharton was because Donald Trump said he was a Wharton grad in the debate in when did he run for president? 2016?
2016,
And
yeah.
literally, I applied in 2017. So or
Yeah.
was it, yeah, I applied. So I didn't really know. I didn't grow up knowing. And I
Mhm.
to Adam Grant, and this was the joke. But I actually picked up his book Originals, and that's when I realized that, oh, this is a school. Like, this is like, oh, he's not a Wharton graduate, like he graduated from a business club. Like, oh, this is a school. And Warby Parker
Yeah.
was here because he talks about the starting of Warby Parker in,
Yeah.
and I bought his book in 2016. So really,
Wow.
2016 is the year I was introduced to Wharton. I had known about Penn, and I had traveled to Philadelphia, but I didn't know the whole story. So it's funny how like
Mhm.
people are groomed to think that they like are supposed to be a part of things. And then some people are like, I just happened to apply and I just happened to get in. What do we
Mhm.
do next? And that's exactly what happened. I happened to apply, I happened to get in. And I was the person that people told, well, why don't you transfer to Brown? And they would tell
Mm.
me a story about transferring to Brown. And I was like, well, I'm already here. Deal with it.
Yeah.
I made the most of my 4 years. But what I will say is I I feel like that culture, I agree with what you're saying. Like there was a dominant culture and some people were pushing back on it. But I also think depending on the circles you were in, that was the only perspective that you saw. So I
Mhm.
really and it was a place where it's like it's what you make it. Like if you surround yourself with
Yeah.
people who are doing the same path, like you're going to only see that. But if you reach out to different circles and spaces, you're going to also see different things. So I would say it's what you make it. But I'm glad that you also have a similar perspective because oh my God, like I'll hear people say like I had to do this, I had to do that, and it's tough
Mhm.
for me. I had to do it, and I'm like, oh, that's why I started this podcast because we shouldn't have to feel like we have to do anything. Like you do it because you want to do it, and I do believe like maximize the career opportunities given to you, absolutely, but still keep
Mhm.
your picture in mind. Like keep your big picture,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah, like find ways to stay grounded and feel connected to, who you were before too. I feel like Brown was super high on my college list too, but I applied to Penn early and I got in. So, and I heard about the Huntsman program too from someone who was involved in Girl Up. So that's another full circle moment for you. But yeah, I was just like, here I am. And then you're locked in too. But like for Huntsman, it's like, oh, you got to start planning out your classes for the 4 years, the first semester. Like you're locked in. And so then it's just about like what you really want to get out of it, how you're going to make the most of it. Um, yeah,
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I also love to talk to you about the Huntsman program. So like being in the Huntsman program, like a program combining international relations and business is really like a unique and powerful combination. Like what drove you to the program and like what do you think made the program particularly impactful for you?
yeah. I think that this combination of like international studies and business is what drove me to it. Like the chance to go to Wharton, go to Penn, like be in Philadelphia, all of that was super appealing to me. And then
Hmm.
having a language that you focus on. Like I was between Spanish and Mandarin, and so I guess that was like a big decision point was, am I going to study, really focus on Spanish and go to like Spain or Latin America during my undergrad? Or am I going to like really focus on Mandarin and try to like get that up? And yeah, I just decided that I felt really connected to Spanish and especially like Latin America. And that's what I wanted to focus on as I more excited about like taking a class about, Latin American politics or cities. And I think that that is really what made it so impactful for me was the classes that I took on Penn's campus,
Hmm.
but also the chances to like go abroad. And then of course like the Huntsman community too. So starting with like the classes on Penn's campus, like the Spanish classes were really great and helped me like take a new perspective with Spanish too. And then also you have like a Huntsman seminar. I think it's called like comparative capitalist systems. At least when I was a freshman, it was called that.
Yeah.
Um, and so like in those Wharton core classes, I felt like really stretched me, but also helped me get some of that like business vocabulary and mindset and thinking.
Yeah.
And then my surprise from Penn was my passion for cities and urban studies. I
Mm.
took like a freshman seminar in urban studies and about homelessness and urban inequality. And I thought that was just like a super interesting class. And I loved how we used like Philadelphia as a case study. And so I was always finding ways that I could take like more of those urban studies classes to at Penn and how I could make them be like about global cities and global urban studies.
Mm.
But yeah, the course was amazing. And then the chances to go abroad. So, like I mentioned, my freshman summer, I went to Mexico. I got this grant from Wharton to go work at a business school and be a research assistant for the summer, which was amazing because I got to go to different cities. I got to learn more about business and business school in Mexico. And that was also like super self-directed. Like it was like, okay, you have this grant, you can go to any country you want. You just need to figure out where you're going. And so I was like cold emailing professors, being like, I have this grant from Wharton. Like, can I come work for you for the summer? And had this amazing relationship with the professor in Mexico who I still like talk to sometimes.
Yeah.
And then also the study abroad in Argentina, I think was super great for my like personal growth and the chance to like take those classes and be outside of Penn's environment for a summer, have some FOMO from Penn, but also like grow and learn so much.
Yeah.
Um, and then yeah, like the Huntsman community too was a really great, I think, support system for like when you first get to Penn and learning how to navigate some of the classes and clubs and job search. So I think like that flurry of like support and opportunities, both in Philly and beyond, really like marked my experience. I think that especially those times that I spent like outside of the country have been really important for my like personal development.
Yeah, that's amazing. One thing I have to say about Penn, like the coursework is just amazing. Like the coursework and the classes are amazing, and I
Hmm.
think it expose you to so many different things. Like even in the work that I do today, like an idea will pop in my head of like, what popped in my head the other day, and I thought about it in terms of relationships, and I shouldn't have thought about it in terms of relationships, but escalation of commitment. I was like, oh my god, like
It's a great
what?
example, escalation of commitment.
Why are they married because they've been together for 5 years? They don't like each other anymore. Escalation of commitment. And I
Yeah.
was just like, "Oh, shoot." But some of the coursework, like, it's still in your head, like, years later, and it just comes up at random times, and I think it's amazing for you that you were able to get not only that business, but also that, like, international studies, aspect,
Mhm.
and then you talk the Mexico research grant. I remember when Wharton used to give out those research grants. I think they probably still do it, for people to
Hopefully
go
they
to.
do. It was so
Yeah.
formative.
Yeah, for people to go to, different countries and stuff like that, and a lot of people did that
Yeah.
their freshman year. I think it was a popular thing, and then also, like, the study abroad. Some people still were able to get study abroad even through the pandemic. For some reason, I don't a lot of people who graduated my year, they either did it in the fall or
Mhm.
they did it in 21 or you didn't do it at all. So a lot of us didn't end up going
Yeah.
abroad. Never worked out because COVID had, like, reset everything. But for those who did that, I'm like, "Yeah, I love that for y'all because that's what you should do,
Yeah.
like, abroad, like, get to know different cultures and also, like, see the world. I think, like, it's so important to travel and to get that exposure. And yes, urban studies, because I was just thinking, like, you minored in urban studies, I minored in urban education, and I wanted to
Mhm.
minor in studies, but I was tied between the education and urban studies department, so ended up taking both. And the courses in
Yeah.
the urban studies department are, like, they were some of my favorite courses in all of
They're so
college.
cool, yeah.
Studying it, I love studying it, and I also love, like, the volunteer work and the field work in Philadelphia. I feel like
Mhm.
it Penn is one of the best places to study urban studies because you're in a city where you're seeing the coursework
Mhm.
and the field work in Philadelphia, like, all of that was so impactful and so formative, to me that I told somebody, I was like, "My next venture is about homelessness." And I was like, "I don't know why I'm saying
Yeah.
that." But, I told them about it. Maybe I'm manifesting it because I took a class in urban studies that also talked about homelessness. I took one that talked about urban
Mhm.
education, one that talked about nonprofits and philanthropy in Philadelphia. So I was very, like, into this, and I was into it. And I was thinking, like, that's one of the reasons why I also wanted to connect with you because I was like, "Okay, I remember you were minoring urban studies." And that's
Mhm.
always so I feel like that whole, like, department and that all those classes, it gives you a special outlook that I think, like,
Mhm.
complements so well, and it really positions you to not only think critically about business, but, like, business within context of, like, where it can be applied, so, yeah,
Yeah,
that's that.
absolutely. Within
Mhm.
context.
Yeah, because context matters. Context
Mhm.
matters. For my last question for you, we wanna know how did you get to where you are today? So navigating the glory that Penn is, you ended up becoming a consultant and winning a prestigious Fulbright fellowship in Mexico. So 2 questions. Number 1, in the sea of undergraduates that are working at, we know the companies, McKinsey, I'm not gonna name all of them because I ain't got time. Goldman, Morgan Stanley, the main companies, like, what led you to Mexico and working with Cicero? And then, like, were there any moments when you wondered, like, am I making the right decision? And if so, like, how did you navigate those moments?
Yeah. So, I think that the wanting to, like, work in Mexico, that is a dream that goes back, like I said, to when I was a kid, but definitely to when I, like, had those experiences in Mexico and Argentina in my undergrad. And I'd known some people who had done fellowships, and I was like, that seems like a great way to have more time that you're like living abroad and that you're really like immersed in, a school or an office. So that was really, yeah, like you mentioned, COVID happening when we were in college. Like the beginning of my college was like Mexico, Argentina, boom, boom, boom. And then
Mm,
COVID really made you slow down, really made me slow down, spend more time in Arlington, Virginia and Philly. And then it still wasn't quite like I had wanted to do a year abroad.
mm,
Or like that was one of my thoughts for a lot of my time about like what my postgrad would look like was like a year abroad or more.
mm,
But it was like definitely like one of these things. And so when that didn't happen for my first year out of undergrad, it was like, okay, like maybe it won't happen. And like maybe that's okay too. But it was always there as like a dream. The Cicero um chapter was I always had this social impact interest. Like I was always interested in Wharton social impact initiatives. I was going to all of these speaker events and all of these clubs. And I had the chance to go to Salt Lake City for a conference junior year about social impact. And I actually met somebody from Cicero there at like a kind of networking mixer for students. And I think I was kind of aware of there being consulting firms focused on social impact. I was definitely aware of consulting. I definitely liked the idea. Like I was in like consulting clubs as well and started one at Penn. And I definitely liked the idea of consulting, but I really wanted to like find that social impact and consulting like
yeah.
blending. And so, yeah, I met Talia there. She ended up being an engagement manager on one of my projects that I would like. We worked together for like 6 months pretty intensely, like 2 years later at Cicero.
Mm,
But yeah, that was like how Cicero entered my consideration set. And there were a couple of other places too. But I also had already gotten at that point. I was going to do an internship for a nonprofit called TechnoServe, which is international development focused. Um, and the team that I was on there was strategic initiatives, and they were all former consultants from the big companies. And that was like one of my best internship experiences. So that was junior summer was at TechnoServe, working with Ginny, who'd worked at Bain before. And I was like, Ginny's amazing. Ginny like writes out what I should do when. She gives me the
mm,
best comments on my deliverables. She's telling me I need to like she wants me to have our check-ins, but have my agenda points sent to her before and for me to lead the check-ins, and she's giving me all this feedback. I was like, I love this work environment. And it was
well,
all in TechnoServe in the context of like smallholder farmers around the world. We were doing a project about tech adoption. Like I thought the content was super interesting too. But I also just loved starting to gain that consulting skill set, like for real, working in Excel and PowerPoint and talking to a lot of different stakeholders. And so
yeah.
that summer for me was like, okay, I think that consulting is what I want to do, especially if I can make it be like social impact. And so, yeah, then I applied for Cicero like senior fall and got in. So I was like, okay, like I think that's what I'm going to do. So the most
Yeah.
dramatic parts of senior year were really just like that the Fulbright like couldn't happen.
Mm,
But then the Fulbright ended up happening 2 years later after I'd had this amazing experience at Cicero. And I feel like I got so much out of it, especially having had this prior work experience. Um, and yeah, just like, and doing it as a 24-year-old instead of as a 22-year-old, I felt like was really amazing. So I think that I
yeah.
did have those moments of like, am I making the right decision? Am I doing like what's best for me? But I think that I always had this kind of internal pull to do something maybe a little bit different and wanting to do work that felt really like impactful and like it mattered a lot.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, I was like, should I move to Dallas? Like that's just kind of random, but
yeah.
it's warm and it has a lot of young people, and I think I like why not just go for it and try it? I feel like I honestly then kind of looking back on my decision to go to China too in ninth grade, I was kind of just like, I'm just gonna go for it and like we'll see
Yeah,
what happens and it'll be okay. And people were like, okay, like you go ahead and you do that and see how it goes. So I feel really, yeah, like grateful for all those experiences that I've had and these chances to learn. Um, and yeah, just trying to make uncertainty my friend still, I guess.
yeah, uncertainty can become friends. Uncertainty can become our friends. I love that for you, and I think one of the things I hear that I hear consistently through your story, and my story is the same thing. I feel like your next move is always so close. And one thing I will say is like I would meet people in college and similar to the coworker that you met, I think her name is Talia. I'd meet people who said like, hey, I did this program, and then I would end up doing the same program, or I would end up doing the same thing. And granted, like I completely fell off the career grid. Like I completely fell off. But I think it's such a great way to find people that like I don't know, that you see yourself doing something similar and they're like, "Hey, like, there are opportunities here." You know, I always say,
Mhm.
like, this move is so much closer than you think it is, and it's so true. Like, sometimes, like,
Yeah.
what we're looking for isn't as far as we think it is, actually right in front of us. So I
Yeah.
think Fulbright and Cicero were there and, both great opportunities, and like you said, give you the ability to y'all didn't hear me on this pre-call, but on the pre-call before this call, I was telling Becca she doesn't have to choose because she doesn't have to, right? You don't
Yeah.
have to choose between purpose and profit. You don't have to choose between, prestige and impact. You can get all of those things. And I try to help people to find abundant opportunities, what I call
Mhm.
abundant opportunities. And I'm glad that you've been able to find your abundant opportunity. Okay, y'all.
I'll
So
tell you
we've,
another I know we're
yeah.
moving on to the next section in a second, but I'll tell you another, like, phrase that sticks with me, and
Mhm.
that's, "What's for you is for you," or, like,
Yeah.
"What's meant for you is for you." And
Yeah.
this was said to me this spring by the barista at the coffee shop under my apartment in Mexico City, Sandra, she
Mhm.
was there every weekday. I was there most weekdays, and we were always chatting it up. She saw me, through a couple different eras, there, but I think she would just
Eras.
offer up this advice. Like, it wasn't like I was even, like, telling her, like, "Sandra, do you think I'd
Mhm.
work in venture capital?" Like, she wouldn't have know what I meant by that.
Yeah.
Um, but,
Mm.
she would just tell me about her life and how she decided to become a barista and her graduate school, and she was, like, 50, and just, like, all of the different things she'd been through, and she said, like, "You have to remember, like, lo que es para ti." Like, what's
Out.
for you is for you, and so then when something's not for you, it's easier too to be like, "Well, it's not for me. They didn't want me or that didn't work out," and so what's meant for me will keep being for me, and it's about finding.
So I do think that Sandra had the advice. She had the advice and she came with it. You know, I think in those
She
moments,
did.
it's so funny because like I've had moments like that too. Like I had a moment where I had quit my job. This shouldn't be my story time, but I'll make my story time. I quit my job. So I was working, my first job out of college was in venture capital. For some reason, I thought like I wanted to be in VC because I was like, okay, I want to be close to entrepreneurs. And like I had interned for some MBA companies. A lot of us did that in undergrad. And I was like, wow,
Mhm.
like I'm fascinated by like the process of building and I want to help them out. So I ended up like, doing a VC fellowship and then getting like a VC placement. And I just walked out of the job. I was like, this is not for me because I would sit on the calls and the VCs would just be like mocking the people presenting. And we had a
Mhm.
Slack where they would like mock the presenters. They'd be like, well, the financials are just super inflated. And they're saying that they're innovative, but this is just a bunch of bullshit. And I'm like, okay, well, this is not for me because I feel like I'm an optimist. So I was like, let
Mhm.
me leave my job. So I left my job. Granted, I was in a fellowship for human rights at the time. So I was like, okay, maybe through my fellowship, I'm going to get a job. I ended up not getting a job through my fellowship. I ended up not getting a job at all. And I remember being like, I don't want to say broke, but I can be real in this podcast, not really having
Mhm.
much. And in my house, back home, everything. And I remember my hairdresser, she doesn't have a college education or anything. She looked at me and she was like, I just see you having multiple businesses. I was like, wait. I was
Mhm.
like, huh, really? And she was like,
Mhm.
yeah. And I was like, nah, like me, really? And that same human rights fellowship, a grant opportunity opened up. And I won my first
Mhm.
grant funding to start when I started Identity, my nonprofit. So I feel like
There
things
you go.
always kind of work out in the end. And sometimes, and
Mhm.
we in this conversation, we feel like so it's like, oh my God, I'm crazy. Like I'm moving to Dallas versus New York or San Francisco or LA. I'm doing entrepreneurship and I'm not doing like what is typical. But for some reason, things always work themselves out in the end. And I've
Mhm.
seen that and kind of like how Sandra said that to you. I had somebody say something to me and I was like, wait,
Mhm.
let me, you know, universe speaking, like what's going on? And we have moments on this podcast where people always say that, like, you have to listen to the signs. They're always
Mhm.
there. And like you said, like the path for you will open up. The doors for you will open. And I think like sometimes it can be scary to deal with like the uncertainty. We're talking about uncertainty a lot today, but when you do recognize that, and I like you, like I went through the recruiting season unsuccessfully. And I
Mhm.
actually graduated. Well, you didn't graduate without a job. I did. I actually graduated without a job. And I remember on graduation day, like having like like almost like a secret panic attack because I was like, oh my
Mhm.
God, I'm gonna happen. I'm leaving this network without a job. I'm leaving this network without the
Mhm.
security everyone else has. And on graduation day, everybody's talking about like where they're going. I couldn't answer that
Yeah.
conversation. So I remember like literally going through like the postgraduate blues. But 2 years later, things are starting to open up and change.
Mhm.
So I think like, yeah, I had my Sandra moment. I just wanted to share that because I had my moment and I had to
Yeah.
wake up and realize like I'm on the path that I'm on because I'm supposed to be on.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. You're on a path and you're making decisions at a moment in time given a certain amount of information and given like your circumstances. Like it's not like I was like, yeah, I have like 8 job offers in New York, SF, and Dallas, blah blah blah. Like, you have constraints and you have to decide what's best for you, what you're solving for, what you're optimizing for too. And then also how you want to be like a role model and an example to other people. Like you sharing that story about not having a job on graduation day, having that mini panic attack and those feelings, like that can really touch a lot of people, I think, too. I think through your work now, you're like really helping a lot of people as well. Um, and so you have to remember that too. I did my
Mhm.
when I finished my job in Mexico this summer, I did my yoga teacher training in Mexico as well, which was
Yeah.
so fun. 2 weeks, like, immersed. Um, and I in my, like, kind of graduation, chat with the teacher where she tells you, like, if you pass or not, basically, I was
Yeah.
saying, like, I don't think that I'm a natural yogi. Like, I'm not the most flexible, not the most strong, like, by far, but I think I could be a natural, like, teacher. And she was like, "Absolutely." And because you come to this not as flexible, especially, like, she was also a, like, tight hamstring girly, and we had bonded over that. She was like, "You can help so many people with that perspective and meeting them where they are too." And so I think also keeping in mind, like, how you can help other people and how you can meet them on their paths and help guide them too is really important.
Absolutely, absolutely. And y'all, it was not a mini panic attack. It was a real panic attack. I
Oh,
remember
wait,
going to
let's
the
not
store.
minimize our panic attack. Let's
No,
say mini panic attack.
and just screaming, like
Yeah.
literally screaming because I moved out the same day I graduated. So my parents are
Mhm.
like, we're from New York, so it's just like pack up your stuff and like let's drive 2 hours and just
Yeah,
get the heck.
yeah,
So I
yeah.
moved, and I remember going and just like screaming because I was leaving the security of education. And at
Mhm,
that time, I was hella nervous because I had put in applications for the deferred programs, the deferred MBA
mhm.
programs. I'm like, "What are they gonna think if I don't have a job?" And like, my anxiety was on 1,000. It was a
Yeah.
really tough time, days of not being able to check my emails because I didn't wanna check the results. It was a lot going on, and I think, like, making that through made me realize, like you said, like, work with what you have. Do the best you
Mhm.
can with what you have. Like, don't put the pressure on yourself to figure it all out, because it's tough. It really is tough, and, like, I said it was a mini panic attack. No, it was a real panic attack. Panic attack. I didn't wanna get in the car back to New York.
Mhm.
It was a
No, I
real
mean,
it was, and
it
I'm
was a real
happy
heavy
now.
situation.
It was a situation, it really, really was.
Yeah.
So, about Mexico and, like, tell me more about the work that you did in Mexico with the Fulbright. Like,
Mhm.
how was working in Mexico, like, different from the US context? And, like, what do you think we can learn from, like, Mexican-based companies? Was there anything in Mexico where you're like, "Okay, like, I think the US needs this," or, "I think we could integrate this and be happier?"
Yeah. Uh, yeah, so working in Mexico was amazing. The way that it works through the Fulbright is I was in a cohort of 15 people, and then they have companies, like, sign up for this program to host a Fulbrighter. And so we interviewed with all of the companies, and then we did like a mutual ranking process.
Mm,
So my placement, like I mentioned, was an organization called Endeavor, which has a presence like worldwide, but Mexico and other like Latin American markets are some of their older markets. And so entrepreneurs join this network, especially when they're like scaling their companies, thinking like Series A and beyond. And then Endeavor helps provide them with this community, this network, these resources to really build like, you know, in Latin America, there weren't necessarily like unicorn companies the same time that there were unicorn companies in the US. But now there are like several unicorns in Mexico, and they're known brands and they're really prestigious jobs and that kind of thing too. So it was really amazing to have like that front seat to like entrepreneurship and tech in Mexico and like really innovative things happening.
mm,
Um, and I really loved being part of that organization. I was writing reports about different trends about women entrepreneurs in Latin America, about artificial intelligence in Mexico, what were people doing, what are different business models. And then I can only speak to like what the Endeavor Mexico culture is, but I felt like it was a really strong and flat culture,
mm.
and also a very like friendly, warm, and welcoming place to work, which is like ideal coming in as a foreigner. Um,
Yeah.
and so I really loved. I'll tell you a couple of like Mexican, like from what I've heard from my friends, this is common in other workplaces as well. Was like greeting your coworkers. Like when somebody arrived to the office, they would walk around to each person's like workstation and say like, "Oh, like good morning, Becca. How are you?" We would do like a little like hug and kiss. Sometimes like they would be like, "Oh my god, I saw this on your Instagram story this weekend. Like, how was your trip?" Like having a
Mm,
lot of like friendships and being very like genuine in those friendships with some of your coworkers. So like that greeting, taking the time out of your day to greet people as they're coming in, to make each person kind of have their moment. Um, and then also we would have lunch together most days in the office. So that wouldn't happen until like later in the day, like 2, 3 p.m., which took some adjusting for me for sure.
mhm.
But actually like getting up and sitting down and kind of not talking about work for a little bit, I found like super enriching. Like I was like, this is why I'm here, is to like get to
Mm,
know all of you, to hear about your work and your life, and to learn all these new slang words. I was always like teasing the managing director about how many slang words I learned from his Slack messages. Um,
mm.
but I felt like that was super enriching. And so I feel like really a lot of what I'm taking is like that friendliness and warmth and excitement that people bring to their offices.
Yeah, I figured you were gonna say, like, friendly and warm and exciting because honestly, like, I mean, especially on the East Coast, that's definitely not the culture. It's very much like,
Mhm.
"Get it done, get it done, get it done, get it done." Like, it's a hot minute that you have, like a New York hot minute to get something done or to respond to somebody, or else your job is on the line,
Yeah,
and they don't forget to remind you that you're replaceable,
yeah.
and, all of these things. So it's wonderful that you got to be in that sort of working culture because I feel like that's what good companies should be, and I do hear that
Mhm,
a lot work in Latin America, like, the warmth and the emphasis on community is second to none, and
mhm.
I'm like, "Wow, like, US, we can learn.
Yeah.
Westernized countries, we can learn." Like, I hate that we treat each other this way at work because literally, like, you're working with a human, not a machine, and I feel like we
Mhm,
haven't realized that yet in the US. So thank you for shedding light on that because I want that for us. Like, I want people to go to work and feel like they're a human
mhm.
versus team, and I try to create that sort of environment, but I also, like, had to unlearn the, like, Wharton way or the
Yeah.
capitalist way, like, I learned some of the things to, like, be a servant leader, to be, because I wasn't that when I first started. So, I think,
Mhm,
like, it's tough, but I love the fact that you were able to get that sort of environment. So, we wanna know, what's next for Becca? What's next? What's next? So, as a achiever myself, I know you're planning your next move because some of us are thinking, like, 10, 20 years ahead. We don't let ourselves live, like, we think, like, 20 and 40 years ahead. Somebody told me I think 40 years ahead, which I was like, "Don't tell me that ever again." But I know you're planning your next move. So what's next for you? Like cities, industries, roles, passion project. Like what's next for you? What's next? What's next? Tell us what's
Yeah.
next. Yeah.
Yeah, so I had, someone in Mexico when I was, kind of a few months out from ending the Fulbright, making a decision, was
Okay.
telling me about how she navigated her career, and she was like, "I've just asked myself at each phase, like, what am I solving for here? Am I solving for this experience? Am I solving for managing a team, learning about this industry, living in this place, making this amount of money? Like, what the just kind of adding some, like, guardrails there." And so I had decided like this spring what I was solving for as my next step was just like continued career growth and
Mm,
being in like a super challenging and fast paced role where I could still learn a lot and like see a lot of new things. And so that was how I ended up deciding to go back to Cicero was I know what the environment is, that it's challenging and fast paced and that I'll be like right into a client project or multiple client projects like right away. That will give me the chance to like learn and grow so much. And then, coming in at a higher level too, I won't be doing the same projects that I was doing 2 years ago at Cicero or 3 years ago. And so knowing that I still had that chance to like learn and grow with the company, I felt like was super exciting for me. And then still sets me up to like continue exploring other interests too, or like it doesn't mean I'm going to be like a career consultant necessarily, but I have some more like ideas. I think that this Mexico time was super exciting to learn more about, especially like tech and startups and what they're doing and what it looks like to work in one of those organizations. But yeah, for now it's like the going back to like consulting and Cicero route and then super excited to have like this new perspective after the time in Mexico to have this yoga teacher certification too. I think that could be like doing more yoga is definitely a goal and a passion project. And I think getting involved too in some of my like causes that are important to me back in the US, I think would be a really fun way too, but also just like reintegrating to life here, seeing more like family and friends. Um, yeah, I'm
yeah.
excited for the next chapter.
Absolutely, absolutely. I literally just found out the other day that you have to get a yoga teacher certification. I'm like, I thought people just had passion and like taught. Because I
No, you
really
need to like learn anatomy.
yeah, I didn't know. Like because there's an organization I follow called Walk Good LA, and they do a lot of like yoga, free like yoga classes in the LA area. And I was like, wow, they're doing such great work, and they connect LA to my parents' homeland of Jamaica. So I follow them, and the guy
Yeah,
was like, oh, I had to get a yoga teacher certification. I'm like, oh, there's certification. I didn't know that. So I literally just learned that a week ago. So it's funny how you brought
yeah,
that back up. But thank you, Becca, for talking about your career. So our last portion of this episode is culture, and in this, I like to focus our guests on what is like your big why? Like what are the things that you know you want your life to touch, or the people in your life that have made your journey special? So I have two questions for you in this section. The first one, and you kind of alluded to this, so this is a great transition. Like one thing I know about you is that you don't just care about working in business, but using business as a force for good. If I had a genie in a bottle and you had three wishes and each wish represents a social issue you'd like to address with your career, what would those wishes be and why?
yeah. I mean, so many wishes, and there's so many different ways you could think about this, but I think one that's really top of mind for me is like sustainability and climate change. And so Endeavor is doing a lot of really cool work with this that like thinking about how to be a more sustainable organization themselves and how to instill that in the startups in their network, which I think was super exciting. So I think that thinking about that, like I'm not sure I'm going to be like a climate change expert, but working for an organization that cares about that and is mindful of it and really uses resources like efficiently and thoughtfully
Mhm.
and isn't wasteful, I think is really important. Also, like diversity, equity, and inclusion is really important to me. And I think that's also something that you can think about internally to an organization. What are their policies? How are they being like fair and transparent? but also is this an organization that's having an impact on like inclusion more broadly, or like is really thinking about financial inclusion and allowing people to have the opportunities. Like I think that's really exciting to me as well. And then a third issue, maybe not as like directly, this organization works in this, but I think that this like health and wellness space,
Yeah.
working for an
Oh,
organization that prioritizes that and really like makes so that employees can be more mindful of their health and wellness. I mean, this is like the yoga teacher training in a little bit, but like how
sure.
great you feel after moving your body and meditating and eating healthy. And really making that a priority like every single day, I think is super important. So those are like those three things kind of occur to me as like things that organizations can be more mindful of. And as we're becoming leaders in organizations, like should be thinking about those things, but also are really important to like the work that an organization is doing in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. That's amazing. That's super amazing. And I feel like I can resonate with your choices as I see so many people in the climate space doing. I feel like climate is not just our future, but our now. Like climate and
Yeah.
sustainability,
Oh, absolutely.
huge space. And there's so
It's
many
so are
amazing.
now. I wish it was less.
But I feel like it is right now. And honestly, like it's so right now that I feel like for those of us working in economic development or racial equity, racial justice, we don't get as much funding as the climate people. Like climate people have
Mhm.
galas in Miami on a regular. Like they get flued out across the country on a regular because I have friends in the space.
Mhm.
So I
Yeah.
know the thing in the climate space is huge. It probably I would say is the most funded social issue in the last 10 years, which is great for
Sure.
entrepreneurs in the space. So that it's amazing, but also anybody working in the space, there's so much funding for innovative projects, even entrepreneurship within organizations, because so many people are investing in
Yeah.
like how to our earth. And then I think also health and wellness has become that's just a huge issue because as we've moved through the world, we realize we're not necessarily healthier with more technology, with more access,
Mm-mm.
with more ability to eat the wrong foods, we're not necessarily healthier. So I think that
Mhm.
like wellness, I feel like that's a huge market where I do see a lot of people coming in and doing a lot of very, very cool things. And then of course DEI and economic development is like my thing. So
Mhm.
lied about some of the things I'm cooking up in that space, but it really is like also very critical and very crucial, especially when we look at the funding of diverse entrepreneurs. That's a huge area of a lot of unrest. And yeah, these are things that I feel like also resonate in my own interest. So my last question for
Mhm.
you, tribe. Um, talk to me about your tribe, the people that have helped you become who you are along the way. I feel like everybody has a tribe. Everybody has a squad. And these people pour into us and give us what we need. So like, how would you describe this group? Who are the members? And then how do they uplift you and keep you safe?
Yeah. No, I feel so like lucky for all the people in my life, whether that's like family and or friends. My uncle at my cousin's wedding gave a toast about family like friends and friends like family, and that's how that felt, that environment for him, and that made all of us, so happy to be there, having a great time, and really feeling so close to each other. And so I'm really lucky. Like one of my best friends, I actually met her in 2016 when we were both Girl Up teen advisors together, like on this board for Girl Up. And then we ended up in the same, she ended up going to Penn too, ended up in the same dorm freshman year. And then I still like text this girl every single day pretty much. Um, Definitely like my parents and my brother as well, supporting me like in all of my endeavors in high school and college and beyond. Um, and then really just having, yeah, friends to lean on like at all different points of my life too. Just navigating a ton of different chapters and transitions, but knowing that my friends are like only a message or a WhatsApp message away, I think is super rewarding. And they've all, yeah, just been like great shoulders to lean on, and to run ideas off of and be there for that muddiness, like we mentioned earlier, like when you're really confused or not knowing what you want to do, and then you're like, I have clarity now. And then 2 days later, you're like, I actually do not. Like that I don't know what I was saying then. I don't know who she was. I don't know who that was. So like having friends who are really patient and willing to like be in that muddiness with you and hold space for that, I think is really like crucial.
Yeah. Wow. I can relate to the like false positive clarity. Like, oh my God, I have clarity.
The false
Uh,
positive clarity, yeah.
I
It's a
really
word.
don't. It's crazy. It's crazy. So thank you, Becca. This was amazing. I feel like this gave the people gems. I coming from this feeling better about the path that I'm on, and hopefully the listeners will. Because yeah, it's not perfect, but it's worth it. And I always say that. So yeah, if there's one last thought you want to leave the listeners, and then we'll tune out. So if there's any last words to the listeners.
Um, my last word is off of that phrase that you just said of it's not perfect. It's the lyrics, it's not perfect, but it's beautiful and it's mine. They're from the
Yeah.
song What Else Can I Do from Encanto. Great movie.
Oh
But
wow.
it's a song where she's like kind of having a self-discovery moment. She's the one who makes everything into flowers and she starts having like cacti and plants and they're not symmetrical anymore. And so I love that song too. And just knowing that things don't have to be perfect, but they're still beautiful and they're yours.
Yeah, absolutely. Between Inside Out and Encanto, like Disney, everybody
Free
the feel.
therapy.
Yeah, it's a lot. Okay, y'all. So this is Saran from the Purpose Professional, and we're out. Bye.
Bye.